Steven, can you hear me? Give me a thumbs up. Or
Loud and clear.
excellent, thank you. It's good. Okay, it is 9:03 on November 13th. I'll now open this special meeting of the Grand County Commission for our budget workshop. President Commissioners Kevin Walker, Evan Clapper, Bill Winfield, Mike McCurdy, and myself, Jacques Hadler. We also have our county clerk, Gabriel Wojtek, and our county attorney, Stephen Socks, on Zoom, as well as our county administrator, Mallory Nassau, associate administrator, Quinn Hall, and our economic development director, Ben Frederigill. And I will now turn this meeting over to our clerk. Thanks, Gabe. And also, I'd like to say thank you for your dedication. I rode my bike past the courthouse a couple times on Saturday, and I noticed your truck parked in front. So I can only assume that you're preparing.
Elected to serve. Thank you. Appreciate that, Chair. All right. Welcome all. Good morning. Let's see. I'm sorry if I missed it. Is Mary going to be trickling?
She didn't say she wasn't coming, so I can only assume she is. I'll shoot her a text real quick.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. I'm going to share the screen here. Thank you. All right, just pulling up the agenda that I prepared for today's workshop, and I'm just going to sort of rattle things off and ask questions as we go through each document that's been prepared. The first one is a very brief overview of the fund balances for both transient room tax. So just ad nauseum, we're going to use the term TRT, but just so everyone is aware, that refers to transient room tax. TRCC is the restaurant and car tax. I don't know actually how that shakes out with TRCC, but it is. And this is, I was actually hoping to provide a larger fund balance overview across all funds. This is what I could get to for now for the purposes of this conversation.
You could probably.
And I've got some further detail on this in the next document that I've just updated within the last 12 hours or so.
No, we just had a special this week because.
But the long story short for this document is to just give us a snapshot of what is remaining in the fund balance for these revenue sources, such that they could be used for additional expenditures in a 24 request, or they could make up for potential shortfalls and the such. Some of the highlights here is for the establish and promote side of TRT. There was a budgeted draw for diversification activities that was settled at the mid-year amendments and prior to the passing of House Bill 416. And this amount, 1.3 million, was determined to be available for diversification activity. That was the amount. That was the full amount available in that category. And what we're seeing towards the end of this year, based on that budgeted draw and including another draw that will have to be executed for the end of this year, the projected end of year fund balance for the establish and promote side of TRT is 1.45 million. TRT mitigation, we think about we usually have the habit of, expending all of TRT mitigation. And so why there would be a fund balance in here might be a question. And I think that largely has to do with over the years, at this time in the budget season, we make a projection through the end of the year to include in the budget to expend by the end of the year for mitigation activity. And what happens is a lot of times those revenues come in a little higher than we end up actually projecting, and it ends up building up in a little bit of a fund balance. And so that's the explanation as to why there's any fund balance at all on the TRT mitigation side. And so, you know, it could very well happen this year as well. Did you have a question?
But we are going to spend that relatively small fund balance this coming year. I mean,
I actually don't have that. I don't have that built in yet. So that could be a.
seems like it should be built in, right?
Yep, I think so. I think it would be, yeah. That would be a big chunk, wouldn't it? That would be offset from that fund expenses.
Yep. John, it's got $400,000 easier.
Because it hadn't never been done in the past, it didn't actually occur to me, you know, why we wouldn't. I don't know, maybe the thought was that it would be more of a rainy day fund or something of that nature, but. And then as we can see, there was an unbudgeted contribution to airport debts that was expended this year. And this Star Hall operations was also overspent a little bit. And so we actually, that fund is in a deficit by negative 33,000. And so that would have to be made up either by, you know, I mean, we wouldn't want to bank on it being made up by end of year revenues coming in over than expected. So I've identified that this very well might be a general fund transfer to balance that fund. Any questions on this document? And like I said, I'm going to go in a little bit more. Commissioner Walker requested that I give a more detailed breakdown of how the fund balance has built up, specifically on the establish and promote side. And then the next document, I will go into just that. Sorry, I should get in the habit of zooming this in a little bit.
Can I just jump in quickly here?
Who's that?
That's Matt Hancock.
I didn't. This is just a commission workshop. I'm sorry, Matt. We're not soliciting public comment at this time.
Okay, I'm just pointing out that there's a discrepancy between your travel calendar.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to open up. Next, I'm going to jump right into the TRT 5-year historical perspective documents. No, this isn't the one. The one that I updated within the last 12 hours is right here. So this is the same document. Then there's this opening fund balance row that I've added.
Is this in the packet?
This hasn't been updated into the packet because I just was doing it last night.
So in that case, could you zoom in?
Yes. That's as far as I'll go without cutting things off. And so this displays here where it says opening fund balance. This reflects at the beginning of 2018 how much fund balance was in was sort of restricted to establish and promote activities. And so you can see from 2018 to 2019, 2020, and so on, how that has built up to where we are now, expecting to be end of the year. So this figure was quoted in the last slide as what we expect to have at the end of this year. And then I have these colored rows here that reflect the changes in statutes that would dictate how these fund balances would be restricted based on how the statute reads. It also goes a ways in describing the split that's reflected in these two first rows between the establish and promote side and the mitigation side. And so as you can see, it's not always the sort of 37%, 63%, I'm sorry, the 33% and 37% split that we currently have that has evolved through the years here. The statute didn't change a lot up until the 2020 budget year, where it went from, and this I don't know how much we want to get into the weeds in terms of the definition of the statute, but for the first, I think when was TRT established? Does anyone know offhand? Is that 2014? 2011? I don't know. Yeah, there was it was read as one third. Let's see, 2/3 of the first 4% of the. I think it's 3%. I think that's an error. Sorry.
But they say it worked out to 47%. That's where it was for a long time.
Okay, that's how it shook out. Okay, so this shows that there was some evolution in how the establish and promote side of TRT was restricted. We can see the split changed in 2020. One thing that I wanted to point out that I think was relevant to the question that Commissioner Walker had was that prior to May 5th of 2021, 2A in the code sort of didn't discriminate between establish and promote and rec film and convention. It was establishing and promoting recreation, tourism, film production, and conventions. So only starting in May 5th, 2021, as I read it, was that 1/5 of 33% established. So, really what I'm getting at is if there is in the rec film convention side of our current proposal, if we're looking to draw from the fund balance to support that activity, my read on this is that the fund balance from this period of time prior to May 5th, 2021 would be available to make up for that activity. And it wouldn't be restricted or designated specifically for what is now establishing and promoting tourism without the rec film convention side.
So
Okay, I'm still a little bit puzzled, and maybe we don't have to take a lot of time now, but you're distinguishing between the rec film convention and prior to 2021. But I think in those years, that was the same pot of money as to establish and promote
That's what I'm
tourism.
trying to say.
Right, but why are they listed as separately in 2018, for example? I don't know how we would make.
I think, what I think that's an artifact of
I can believe there's something in our accounts that reflects, but in terms of how we can legally spend the money, I don't think it makes sense. So I just want to make sure we look carefully at that before.
my best guess is that there might have been an account line changed or a name change, perhaps.
Okay, and then it changed retroactively.
Right, and once you change it once, it changes that line for all of history. And
Okay,
that might be the reason.
okay, that explains it. But again, we want to know exactly how much is available for spending on the rec film convention.
Okay, and so long story short, I created this little breakout to sort of confirm that there is fund balance available to support specifically rec film and convention activity. Moving down, I just created a little bit of a snapshot in terms of the current budget allocations with end of year projections, how that relates to the current requests for 2024. And then coming down here, there's this line that's been that's 23424220 that's called advertising, and I felt that for comparison's sake, we see the trend of the use of that line, and that has been there's a few lines in Fund 16 that were encapsulated previously in the one individual line 23424220, And so for matter of comparison, I pulled that line as a way to sort of continue to see how that advertising line trend is spent. In addition, and it's important to note that there are things like brochures and salaries and other types of expenditures that could very well be categorized or distinguished as contributing to more traditional promotion activity that's not encapsulated in that line. So it's just a stab at trying to compare with that individual line from the past.
That's just straight up traditional advertising.
Yeah, I think that I take it to mean, I take it to mean sort of really advertisements that are, as we'll see in the Travel Council Advisory Board recommendation, advertising that's designed to drive revenue, I think maybe is a way to put it.
Okay.
And then
Promotional advertising.
Yeah.
Right.
And then where would those salaries, brochures and stuff, where do they show up?
We'll see them in the in the budget sort of overviews that I pulled that are included in the packet.
Is there a time where they enter into this column, or is there a?
No, they're separate. So that I'm trying to just point out that this is part of the picture.
But those would be eligible for these funds? The brochures.
They are spent out of these funds,
Okay.
just not out of this line.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And then just a snapshot here of the responsible rec advertising line, current budget allocations, what we would expect to spend by the end of this year, and the 2024 requests. So just giving you all an overview of, we see a pretty fairly steep increase here in the rec film convention category. This is the category overall that includes all the lines, and basically what we're talking about there is film commission activity and responsible rec, and this responsible rec transfer.
So in other words, that 367,000 and the second to last line is part of the 816.
Correct.
And the transfers coming from?
The transfer, what specifically are you referring to?
The line above. The
Oh, the
responsible
transfer,
rec-
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That just is a transfer from Fund 16 of TRT funds to Fund 47, which is Grant County Active Trails and Transportation. That's what that transfer refers to. So it's kind of a pass through. You might see.
So instead of like splitting the rec film and convention revenue stream and then going directly to two different funds, GCAT and film, first all of it goes to film and then film, sends some over to GCAT.
So you're saying the 367 is part of the 816?
Correct. This is 16,411 as a whole category, and this is this lives within 16,44111. Sorry, that probably could have been tried. I guess I tried to distinguish that here with the total category, but I can see how that was maybe not fully clear.
And then the remainder, other than the 367, is that all film commission stuff, or is it also include some kind of contribution?
There's that transfer to Recreation Special Service
Okay.
District, I believe, and we'll have a look at that.
And is any of the Grand Center stuff funded out of this convention?
No, that would be out of largely out of the TRCC revenue. Any other questions at this time? Okay. Anytime. All right, I'm gonna close that.
Oh, the eligibility, when you were talking about the different colors with those are maximums, or those are minimum spends, or how is that?
Max, these sort of qualifiers would be considered maximum. Yeah. I'm gonna look real quick. Speaking of TRCC,
In that maximum spend, are there a minimum threshold requirements on those? Or is there a minimum required spending in our percentage spending in those?
I mean, I think it's a little, the way it used to be is the number associated to establish and promote, that was a minimum amount, not a maximum amount. Like we don't have to spend anything on mitigation. We could put it all into the establish and promote in the 4 categories. But when in the 2020 or 21 change, I think this was unintentional on the part of the authors, but the statute got changed so that we had to split it that way exactly.
Yeah.
So that it actually gave us less flexibility. I don't think that was intentional. It was just, choice of
Just how
wording.
it happened.
So shall be done that way, Brad. So
yeah, I have this sidebar. All right, just an overview of how TRCC funds have been allocated. So we go back into 2018, we see it was spread out, in such ways. There was more contributed to the airport in particular. Some to Thompson Fire, and there's been some trail grant matches, trail development that have been a use of TRCC funds in the past. But however, sort of more recently, dating back to 2021, TRCC funds have been focused primarily on the Grand Center with these 2 lines here, OSTA operations, this debt service payment from the airport, as well as fireworks contribution. As a point of reference here, OSTA's full 2024 total next year budget request is $880,140. So that's offset by this 747. So that leaves roughly $100,000 that is pulled from the general fund to support OSTA. And Grand Center's, the Grand Center's total budget is total budget request for 2024 is $799,335. And that is offset, actually pretty closely through the TRCC revenues. That doesn't take into account some funding that the Grand Center receives through the Southeastern Utah Association of Local Governments.
And is there anything that says that we can't completely fund all the OSTA operations through TRCC?
No, not to
And
my
what about
knowledge.
the Grand Center?
Not to my knowledge. I believe that these are, as long as we stay within the realm that is called out. I haven't looked at this statute, but these can be used readily for their uses that are displayed here.
But there is something that says we can't fund both of them fully, which is just the laws of arithmetic. There isn't enough money to. So,
Gabe, what sheet are you on? I'm not finding that in the agenda here.
This one's here, the presentation item number 2, TRCC historical budgets versus actuals.
second one.
Thank you. I was ahead of us.
No problem. Any questions at this point? Thank you. And then moving on here, we'll touch on the Travel Council Advisory Board recommendation that was presented by the chair, Jenny Gleason of that board, and approved on September 12th of this year. And so there is no recommendation for any changes for the use of mitigation expenditures. Tourism expenditure, the establish and promote side, or the 37% of total TRT collections. The priorities presented include salaries and overhead for tourism division of economic development department, competitive street and strategic marketing, paid media, strategic planning, visitor education, familiarization tours, and data research and software. And there is a recommendation of the rec film and convention side specifically to support the film commission budget and associated activities, community event grant, and Moab Art Trails. TRCC, the recommendation there is specifically towards Moab Information Center. As we saw, there isn't any, there haven't recently been any allocations of that funding towards the MIC, but also more specifically hosting. Any questions regarding that recommendation presented?
With the obviously revenues that are generated by OSTA go back into the operating funds.
They go back into the general, that we categorize those in the general fund revenue.
Is there any revenue generated for the general fund through the MIC?
No.
Is that some,
Maybe perhaps rents.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that there might be a rent payment that we do collect. So the answer is actually yes.
And probably similarly for the Grand Center, there's a small amount of revenue that comes in for like room rental fees.
That's right. Okay, and then so we'll just stick for now on the topic. Well, we were on TRCC before looking at the TCAP recommendation. We'll jump right back to TRCC to look more closely at the budget request for next year. And I suppose this is kind of, we actually really did cover this in that historicals versus actuals page on the far right end of that spreadsheet. That just shows how these allocations are made, or how these allocations are currently proposed. And ultimately it's quite rather similar to the previous couple of years, or the previous year. These actuals and projections aren't filled in yet. These transfers are made at the end of the year to make up for these missing actuals, and I didn't enter projections in for those lines, but they would be expected to line up with the projections provided by our budget consultant.
And did we go over those projections today?
It wasn't in the plan because I didn't have it. I got that information late on Friday. And the plan right now is to include those materials in the 1128 workshop. They've been provided to you all through email. And if there are any questions, they could be, brought up at that workshop, or, otherwise discussed. Obviously any discussion regarding those projections would want to be brought to light in an open and public meeting, of course.
Okay. And today's meeting is just a workshop. We're not making any decisions today, correct?
There might be some decisions regarding, I guess that is yet to be determined. I think one thing is there are some, the solid waste district, for more specifically, has been asking about, if they could expect an increased allocation toward their activity. And I think that I was hoping that we would be able to let them know at this workshop, at least, whether there would be any, whether there might be any adjustments to their allocation of $400,000.
But I don't think we're not passing a resolution or ordinance or anything like that. So any decisions we sort of made would be informal and could change our mind later.
There could be straw polls taken, the chair so wishes.
I guess my question relates back to the projections then, because those are going to play a pretty important role in our decisions on any additional funds allocated out to any department. So making decisions without going through those presentations a little bit seems to be backwards, I guess.
Okay.
I mean, I agree with you that those projections are important and we should look at them closely before making overall spending decisions. But it seems like most of the stuff on the agenda today are funds with where we're restricted with how we can spend them. So there's not very much impact on the general fund. I guess the exception would be if we, if we were to say today that we like, both the film and GCAT spending more money and we're going to have to put some general fund money in there. That's the only potential, and the rest of us just looking at how we spend the other funds. So I think the general fund implications are relatively small today, and I do agree that we should look at those making bigger general fund decisions.
I would welcome any conversation now or discussion now, even though it's not available in the packet. If there are concerns or, any suggestions to be made about the current revenue projections as they've been presented in the budget advisory board and carried over into the tentative budget. It had been made mention that it would be, as they're currently entered, it reflects 0% growth from how the end of 2023 is projected. And so, yeah, I would love to know if there are serious concerns regarding what is currently entered in the tentative budget so that I can make appropriate action in response.
Well, I definitely think that his projections, and we don't have them in here, aren't the way we ended up in the budget advisory meeting. I know that I believe it was Chris Kaufman asked that he lump all of the taxes together, which then showed a fairly negative trend overall. And so to be thinking on a positive level there somewhere would concern me a little bit. And if we're going to make decisions on any department, then I think those projections are going to weigh in on that. I know, Kevin, I disagree. I mean, those projections are going to affect both of these departments that we're possibly discussing spending more money on here today. So I think there's a pretty negative trend going on in our TRT and both our sales tax revenues, and that's going to affect our budget overall for next year. And I don't think that maybe there's but one or two departments that aren't asking for additional funds. And I think that we've got to look at the big picture if we want to be spending money anywhere.
I think for economic development, which is using the tourism establish and promote, they've got a very large fund balance that we have to spend. We can't save it forever. So I think for this year at least, even if we thought they were going down by 10% or something, that wouldn't really affect my decision on how much to spend on economic development, because we've accumulated so much in past years and we need to spend it. So I think for that's most of the money we're talking about. As I said before, I think for the other two departments where they might be going beyond what can be funded by TRT and then they're dipping in the general fund, yes, there is an implication, but I think it's probably it's $200,000 or $300,000, small compared to our big picture funds.
Well, I'm not saying that some of these departments don't need some extra money, but I don't feel the pressure to spend it this year if we haven't spent it in past years. What's the analogy that all of a sudden we've got to get rid of this money?
Well, it's not an analogy, but there are statutes. I'm sorry that I interrupted. I don't know the exact details, but there's actually a limit to how much we can accumulate. It's a certain percentage of what we take in each year. And I know in the past we were bumping up against that limit. So I think for the TRT, tourism establish and promote, I think we might get into trouble if we try to spend less. That's
are those, Gabe, do you know if those laws are around our total budget and or is that specific to the different fund balances? This maximum, I know
there are stipulations regarding base year expenditures and spending levels in relation to that. I can't say off the top of my head how the most recent iteration of that statute reads to that effect, but
don't know if I'm remembering this correctly, but it's a percentage of what you spend is what you're allowed to save.
That's a
So
percentage of income.
by spending more, you're actually allowed to save more.
No, it's a percentage of income. Like if, you know, the revenue for is last year was $1 million, and this might say we can only accumulate 50% of that or something. I forget the exact numbers, but there are limits. And I remember within the past couple of years, you know, Chris was, you know, working hard to make sure we weren't bumping up against those. But I guess I do think I agree with your larger point, Bill, that thinking about revenue and also how much we want to dip into fund reserves and all those things, that's an important part of deciding how, that's, you know, very much tied to how much we spend on any individual department, including a couple that we're talking today. And so I do think even if we were to make some kind of tentative decision today, I think we should definitely be willing to revisit it if we decide that we need to cut more. So I think I do agree with your main point.
And I think one of the things that helps me wrap my mind around it is sometimes we don't finish the budget this way, but in the narrative, we kind of look at percentages, like we give this much percent to the sheriff's office, this much percent to OSTA, this much percent. And then like looking at how those percentages have changed over time is kind of insightful for me because yes, sometimes, you know, $100,000, $200,000 here or there looks like a really big number to me, but in the scheme of things, it's like a small percentage point. I know we can't finish the budget working off percentages, but I mean, that's kind of how I do it with my kids. You know, you're going to get half of this and you're going to get half of that. And I don't know how big it's going to be, but we're going to split it, you know, this way between you. So.
Yeah, totally. Are there any other commissioners that want to weigh in with regards to the revenue projections and what's currently entered in the tentative budget?
Yeah. I look forward to going into that more because I went back and watched the YouTube of the meeting, and I kind of was having trouble tracking with some of this the reasoning behind keeping it at zero growth. But we can get into that more.
But would you say more generally, did you feel a cause for concern regarding it being 0% growth being too bullish, or?
No, I was actually surprised that it with the past trends and growth, you know, I think that there is like some correction that's happening, but I was surprised to see it like at zero. So as I was surprised to see it in the sense that I thought it was conservative.
Okay. So it seems like there's, yes.
Conservative in the way that you expect more or less.
Yeah, in the sense that you know, the overall trend over time and with its little peaks and valleys that I was following the YouTube and I was watching the YouTube and I was having a hard time following how with this, you know, typical double-digit growth every year that suddenly it's like at zero. So
No, it's not your fault. I think the discussion at the end of that workshop meeting was a little chaotic, and I think my memory of where we landed and Bill's memory are kind of different, and it was probably just ambiguous. So don't bother watching it again. You won't.
I still think we go back to those trend lines and promotional advertising, and when our promotional advertising budget is under $1 million projected, and it was 2019, it was 2.1 or 2.2 million. And if you adjust for inflation, that's even more yet. So we're basically at 40% promotional advertising of what we were doing then, and I believe that that's catching up with us. So I agree that trend up and down with the dips that you're talking about, Evan, but we're clearly in a correction here, and part of that correction that's happening is because of our promotional advertising, and both TRT and sales tax, I've said this before, account for over 50% of our income as a county, and property tax is somewhere in the 30%. And I'm pretty sure I remember the last meeting in here, but property tax is a huge issue right now, and to be expecting to project a budget that's above and beyond what we're doing clearly here with promotional advertising, then means that we're gonna be pulling more money out of property tax somewhere. I don't think. Well, I know, but that it has to come from somewhere, so that's my wanting to follow that trend line very closely here, that I don't see 0% as conservative. I see 0% as our midline. And our conservative line would be following what's actually happening, which is a downturn in TRT and TRCCA, and I forget the acronym. But so then a positive would be our aggressive line somewhere, but I really see a negative is somewhat a, or a zero projection is a positive. It's an aggressive forward. It's not conservative. And I just want to continue to reiterate that we've got to be careful here. Promotional advertising is down. We're at about 40% of what it was in 2019. And if we continue to talk about increasing, whether it's one or two or all of the departments here, that money's got to come from somewhere. And I'm not ready to get off of that issue.
And I'll definitely agree that I have no interest in pulling of increasing property values for this year. I also think that, it's one thing to look at how the spending has changed over the year, but really the spending is to drive the revenues. And so although expenditures might be going down, the revenues are still climbing. And so, but if we're getting into, how much are we gonna prop this up with property taxes or whatever? I think we're far from that, and I'm not. Just to reassure, I'm not looking at. There's a maximum of what we can spend these funds on to offset property taxes, and I don't think that we're at the point of tweaking that.
And Gabe, I don't mean to interrupt what you're going through.
No, it's good. Just think the conversation should be had.
Those projections, I just disagree with them to some degree, and Chris Kaufman kind of made light of that when he asked that they all be put into one. So I'm just being very cautious. I'm going to err on the side of being conservative here in my decisions moving forward. So,
yep, thanks for getting it out there.
But the main discussion because I'm restraining, I have a lot to say in response to that, but I try not to say it. Save it for the next workshop, I think, because there'll be a workshop where we look at the graphs and discuss that a little bit more, right? Or is now the time? I think now's not the time because you don't have the materials in the packet.
I think that's
right.
Yeah, that's the case.
Okay, some more similar.
I think that in this case, if we had a full commission here present today, I would probably request that there be a straw poll taken to take a temperature on sort of solidly moving forward with what's currently entered in the budget or not. And it doesn't seem like we really have that luxury. So what I'll do is that I will have to just create a separate scenario with different projections to go along with that revenue projection conversation for purposes of illustration. And then when we have a full commission, it can be sort of decided on officially amongst the whole body.
And it might be good if you're adding scenarios, maybe one that's higher than the current and one that's lower would be good.
Right. That's exactly what I was going to say. I would like to see a downfall projection as much as a positive. So.
Okay, great. Thanks, y'all. Good discussion. Let's see. We were TRCC. Did my mouse fell asleep? Let's move right along here. I'm going to touch on TRT mitigation, just to provide a snapshot here of mitigation uses. One more. So as you can see, as currently based on the conversation that was just had, the projected revenue for 2024 equals how we see it, how the consultant sees it coming in at the end of 2023. This line or this, and this is pretty much stayed pretty flat in terms of how there's some fluctuation here, but how these are allocated, it has stayed pretty much the same. I don't know if there's a feeling right now that anyone wants to express for solid waste special service districts, for their regard in terms of what they might expect. Is there anyone that thinks that we would allocate more than 400,000?
What was the ask, Gabe?
I believe it was 500.
I believe so. Like most entities, I think it was as much as possible,
Right.
please.
I think I assume that sometime in the future, we're going to be looking at, we got various requests, like, there's positions and then there's maybe new capital expenses and other things. And my understanding is we're going to try to, rank them and then decide, what the threshold is for what we want to fund. And so I think the extra requests that solid waste is making could be thrown into that list.
Right.
And, so that it gets considered along with all the other requests for, that much money. So that, I think that was one of the questions you were asked, that's, so if, do we want to spend more than 4,000, 100,000? Maybe, we have to see, and we'll think about it in conjunction with all the other requests. I guess, I don't know if they're wanting to know if we're going to drop it below the typical 400. Do I have that number right? 400.
It looks like 400 for the last 2 years.
And I think what you're suggesting is, and it's probably more my error, because typically in this column, we've included everyone's full request.
I see.
And so if I was following that convention as I have everywhere else in the budget,
Yeah.
I would have entered 500 in here and y'all would have made a decision to bring it back down to baseline. But I
Yeah.
probably overstepped by keeping
Well,
it at
it's
baseline.
kind of different because they're a separate entity. But I was suggesting that it be treated that way.
And in part of that decision, solid waste, we do see a revenue off of them. So we
Well,
would,
they're a separate entity, so they do bring in a lot of revenue that doesn't cover all their expenses, and then we subsidize them to make it up.
does that subsidy number might change with the revenue projection?
Their revenues are part of their own separate budget, and so we
Okay.
don't see them in
Well,
these
yeah,
charts.
we don't see them come back to us.
When you're saying 500,000 was a request that they made, was it?
And one thing that comes to mind now is, as we saw on the very first slide, there is a fund balance in TRT mitigation. So it could be considered to allocate what is remaining in the fund balance for any number of uses that are qualified under mitigation, which could be solid waste. I know that there are some stipulations in the statute that allow for expenditures towards EMS. It could even be possible that fund balance, I can't say for sure right now, because I know it's kind of specific as it relates to EMS or emergency services, but it could be possible that TRT mitigation fund balance could be used towards, say, the new ambulance that EMS is requesting.
Except that I guess I disagree with that way of thinking about it, because in effect, the TRT mitigation should be treated the same as regular general fund money, because we could just take all of the current fund balance and put it in the law enforcement, that would still be room there. So,
Yeah.
So I don't think the fact that there's a fund balance is a reason for or against, funding an ambulance or something.
And if we create the new dispatch, would that be its own department? Would it get a new line in here? Or would that stay under the law enforcement?
Yeah, I think that lives in its own category in the general fund. And I haven't been privy, or it hasn't been suggested to me that we would use this revenue source to support that.
But it has become its own separate line in our regular budget, right? So like the jail's budget, was it the jail?
Yeah, broke off.
The jail budget went down this year because dispatch was taken out to its own separate category.
And would it be eligible or no?
I think so, but I mean, there's lots of things that are eligible. If, are we
Right,
talking
right,
about the balance?
Well, I
Mitigation.
was just, when we started comparing, like, oh, should we spend it on law enforcement? Should we, that's, if we're creating a new large expense in law enforcement, that's gonna kind of motivate me to offset that, more.
Yeah, but again, I think we should look at all the expenses that are going to be paid out of the general fund, including TRT mitigation, which is effectively the general fund, and compare them all together. So I think dispatching the ambulance and bunches of other things, including new positions.
Back to the solid waste contribution there, would it be out of line to ask them to perform some kind of an audit or a study on when they see being able to be in the black? I mean, we basically bought a business, which I still don't understand why. I wasn't a part of the decision, but we took something out of the hands of the business and put it into a government entity and seldom does that ever go from the red to the black. But at one point it was in the black. Could we ask? I mean, am I out of line here to ask a department to give us some justification of when they see they do have their own revenue stream, as Kevin said there? So are we in need for them to raise their trash rates? Where do we go to? Is this an ongoing every year? They want more and more to cover a shortfall somewhere, then we probably ought to be considering getting out of the trash business.
I would hope that there was a business plan associated with their purchase and that would be readily available.
Yeah, but but it include really the special service district added the collection piece, correct? I mean, I don't believe the landfills were ever publicly held or privately held.
Maybe not,
Right.
but I think that's part of their revenue stream.
Right, but I guess the analogy of that there was a private business that we took over. It was really a combination of a private business into a public service.
So it might be that the collection's running in the black, but the overall operation, including the landfills, is losing money. Is that what you're?
Well, I mean, I think that it kind of misrepresents because the landfills were never privately owned. And so we kind of always supported the landfills.
I can agree with what Kevin's saying there. Are they actually in the black on their collection side? And maybe we're unaware of it, or I'm unaware of it. So
I do think that they would very much like the opportunity to either come and speak at a workshop or submit something. And they actually reached out to me about that and when this would be coming up, and I was out of town, so I feel badly, but I do think that they'd like that.
And I agree that more info would help with the decisions.
Yeah.
Certainly, yeah, need the info.
And I don't think I'm trying to affect this year's decision, but if this is a trend that's ongoing, where is that coming from?
That's what I was.
Yeah, no, I definitely, I don't think there's time to do it in the next few weeks, but in the future, yeah, definitely. And they have been in to give us presentation from time to time. I can think of a lot of, overly long presentations from them, but next time they do that, we should maybe get them to focus more on,
Right.
break even.
And it actually brings up, I'm going to move on to the next slide, just to touch on Fund 16 and we'll move back to it, but it brings up another item, which is in rec film convention. And I don't mean to suggest that it's not a very worthy contribution that our residents need, and it probably doesn't make up for, it probably could be increased because things like youth recreation are really important to the community and what our residents want and need. But this expense request here of 137 of rec film conventions, I carried it over into next year. I requested the rec districts sort of provide some background or at least make a formal request associated with it. And it would be nice for the commission to get updated as a whole of sort of an overview of the rec district's purposes, plans, all those sorts of things. So we're not just going on cruise control carrying this over
Right.
without
Where that
thinking.
money is actually.
No, I-
spent.
I agree. Maybe Mike could speak to that. I was the rec district representative my first year on the commission, and it was interesting getting into the nuts and bolts of that, but I haven't followed closely since then.
I can already speak to it. Most of the rec budget was dedicated to heavy, actually helping OSTA in many points.
And they do grants for various programs that
Yeah.
change over the years.
And
But
this year was one of the first years that there was actually a recreation request by the softball tournament that was held,
oh yeah,
or just a funding request. So I know that
That's-
they can speak to those line items.
Yeah.
But I cannot. I don't think that they had any requests for more. They just wanted to keep it the same.
it's been 137 for 3 years. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there was a formal decision by that board that was forwarded along to the county and just, I never got it, but I just haven't. Yeah, that didn't come to my mailbox, even after I made a request.
Yeah, and I think that went up significantly my first year on the rec board. I think it was something like 70,000 before that, if I remember right.
That rings a bell.
Yeah.
Gabe, I'm taking that note down. I'll get it to you.
Thanks, Mike.
Not a problem.
All right, so just a quick overview. We have Ben here and I invited him to be here to answer any questions. I think especially with the actual agenda item we have dedicated to Fund 16. And you know, the main, I directed him to mainly be prepared to talk about the film side of the budget and the changes there, largely because the wider aspect of this budget is, I would say, remains relatively unchanged, with the exception of the elimination of diversification. But the nature of how things are allocated, and I'll stop scrolling so we don't all get motion sickness. There's an increase that we see here in the requests versus the 2023 budgeted amount from 592 to 816. But the other categories in this fund, as you can see, the request for 2024 in 4820 tourism promotion is actually less than the 2023 approved budget. And so I just wanted to touch on it here. Non-TRT expenses are those that are largely offset by grants and revenues that are in a revenue category above. But I don't know if there was any general questions now. They could perhaps wait for when we come up to the agenda item for Fund 16 and we get Ben up here at the table if there are any questions that he can help ask. But just for the purposes of, I put in this part of the agenda for the purposes of illustrating transient room tax allocations as a whole. As you can see, 15,000 to wrap up diversification activity is built into this budget, and there was a contract that was extended on y'all's approval to wrap that program up. So I'm gonna just move on if you all don't mind. In this request, let's see here. Where is it? Back down to promotion. There is this item here, 110,620. That was a late request that came in. It didn't come through the budget advisory board, but $50,000 had been allocated to the county fair effort. And Angie has produced an itemized list describing that 110,620 that I've included in the packet for y'all's consumption. But Angie does a good job of really having everything broken down very fastidiously, and just to give you all the picture what that increased request, what is actually behind it.
Does it compare with the expenditure of the fair this year? Is there a thing that shows what we're buying for our extra 60,000?
I don't have that information right now, what we spent the 50,000 on this year.
Right. I'd like to see how she wants to expand that. I think that'd be.
She does. She does have the itemized list of what she would like to spend it on.
Yeah, that's what
And-
Gabe just
yeah.
pulled up, but I'd be curious to see what's changed.
You just want to see what the new items are.
Exactly, yes, that's what I'm.
I think one, and I'm gonna get this wrong, is something like a rodeo, do you remember?
One was a rides, circus rides, or et cetera. The
Mhm.
other was that purchase of the dog tank that we saw previously.
Isn't that from this year's?
Yeah, that was for this year.
That's what I thought. So that wouldn't speak to this.
I do think it's something like
It's
youth
like one big kind of-
rodeo,
okay.
something like that
Like an
being
addition.
added in as
Gotcha.
well.
Bringing in a youth rodeo.
But just to, just to further clarify too, though, that it is coming from, not from rec film and conventions or mitigation, obviously. This is coming specifically out of the establish and promote tourism
Okay.
budget.
Great.
And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
not that it's not important to account for every dollar, but
Yeah.
it's kind of
Thanks, Gabe.
there's funds available for it. And then, so moving on, we'll move into the next agenda item, which is the review of Fund 47, Parks, Trails and Recreation. Maddie, if you want to step up just to be available, I could even give you the mouse at any point. But Maddie prepared a budget narrative that you all can see in the packet. That gives an overview of how the department is structured, the nature of the revenues and their sources. And as well as sort of a overview of the expenditures associated with that department. I know that there was a request from. Yeah, my understanding is that there isn't, from year to year, that your department is maintained by grants and sales and use tax revenues and not from the general fund to support salaries and benefits and things of that nature. And yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't need to read this for everyone. Are there any questions sort of off the top?
Okay, so just to make sure I'm understanding things correctly, out of the overall $1.6 million budget, a lot of, there's a 400,000 or so this optional sales tax, and that's mostly for maintaining the paved trails, I think, is that?
Yes.
And that sales tax has restrictions on how it can be spent, and some of it goes to roads, but some of it is going to our paved pathways. Is that roughly right?
That's correct.
Okay.
And that's mostly the pathway north of town, the Moab Canyon pathway, as well as the 128 corridor.
So
This gets a little bit maybe out of my realm so far as what I've been directly involved with for budget past years, but I think that about 100,000 of that goes into basically saving up for periodic impact
Right.
maintenance,
all right.
on a maintenance schedule, and then a portion of that goes to fund the trail operations.
Right. Okay. And that's that's maintaining the trail systems around, right?
But in any case, I think that part of the budget, I don't feel the need to scrutinize too much
No.
because, there's just a relatively short list of other things we could have spent that money on.
Right.
And then the next one, the TRT chunk, around $600,000, is broken into two parts. The tourism established promotion, that's mostly things directly related to communicating with tourists here, and advertising to them. And then the remainder, the 367, I think that's now effectively general fund money, because it kind of, between the film commission and GCAT, we don't have enough rec film convention money to fulfill all the requests, so we either need to cut it down or start spending general fund money. And then the final roughly $600,000, those are all funded by grants, and so again, not something I feel the need to scrutinize closely. So I think what it comes down, I think probably what the commission would be mostly interested in is that 367 chunk, and is that compared to what we're doing with film, does this seem like you know, how we want to spend the money. It's not,
But with that bullet below it, the establishing tourism and promotion, do you see that as being eligible to? If we decrease the 367, could we increase the 250?
my hope is that 250 is as large as it can be. And then there's kind of some gray areas, but I think we want to, if anyone ever audits how we're spending TRT funds, I think we want to be able to show that in, every instance we're obeying the rules, et cetera. So we could look again to see whether the 250 increase, but my impression is
That's the maximum.
More or less, given that there's always some shades of gray, but I think we're not going very far into the gray.
Right.
That,
That's great.
And I would say, so if you look at that, item in the packet, that's the expenditures, the ones highlighted in yellow are the ones that fall more into that like traditional advertising promotion. And those decisions, the ones I highlighted basically were on guidance they received from the commission last year, so keeping in line with that.
So as you can see, here's that total there. That was in that establish promote side in the previous document. And this is a itemized breakdown of exactly how those funds are proposed to be spent.
Gotcha.
And this is the funds out of the 367, or this is the funds out of the.
This is the 257.
I think it was a 250.
This is the 250. Yeah.
Yeah, and to clarify, so I have it broken down into like programming requests, which would be specific line items, and then the salary portion of that. So for rec film convention, the total program request out of that portion of TRT is approximately 89,000, and then the salary request, salary and benefits is 278,000. So that's kind of how I have it on my end, with the programming being like the line items, and then working with Renee for the percentage of salary and benefits based on like hours spent project managing different projects.
No, and I hear what you're saying, but where is that showing up on this?
So this is just the programming.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should we go into
The budget request.
general budget request?
Yeah.
So
I don't think it's actually.
but you were just describing how that 367 or 376 side is the nature of that.
Yeah, so and I can it's a pretty simple explanation.
So again, we're looking at
So yeah, so the portion of advertising promotion that goes to salaries would be 75% of the responsible recreation program coordinator position for managing projects that are in that category highlighted in yellow. So for example, like the educational video series we're working on, the economic development. Currently that's like myself and Anna managing that project, so those hours. Filling those hours to that fund.
And so salary can be used in that, out of that promotion line, you're saying? Money can be allocated to salary, which seems like the majority of it is going to salary.
so long as it can be clearly demonstrated that it's associated directly with the activities that are specific to that use.
and so similar, like I think a lot of Ben's salary is paid for out of the tourism promotion or for some of the other employees. Like Melissa would be a good, I would guess almost all of her salary comes out of your tourism promotion.
Yeah, and this was when Renee and I were working on this. This was based on the guidance we got last year for this year. So, and this year, it's honestly been because of the changeover in economic development, I would say that the hours I spent managing those projects that kind of started in economic development have been much higher. So this is, my projection of next year, if there's, now that we have a director, shifting some of that project management back over. This is my estimate of what happened. So conservative compared to what the actual is.
So as far as where this, conversation might go from here, I'd be happy to defer, with any musings or input at this point. But it was my intent to really just be as out in the open and transparent as possible with regards to all of these proposed allocations, just so there isn't any lingering confusion, about the use of these transient room tax dollars.
And I can expand a little bit. So this process is a little bit different than what we've done in past years. So for this meeting, I guess I'll need some guidance from you guys about what, there's things covered in the BAB, and maybe you have additional questions at this point. But I think some important, big picture things are that, some considerations are that some of these line items that we're requesting are tied to the requests both for GCAT and for economic development for those new positions. So by kind of stratifying our trail ambassadors and potentially getting a volunteer business coordinator, that would increase capacity for more projects. So we budgeted in lines for project development, so that if we get those folks, they have some funds to work with to achieve those goals. And then also the assistant in economic development. I think that position would ideally be taking on management of some of these big promotion/education projects. And then another important point is that, and we kind of talked about this in the BAB, but just for the budget advisory board meeting. But just to recap, there are some projects that are in the GCAT budget and some projects that are in economic development, but we're co-managing those projects. So it's really just a logistical decision about which budget those fall into. Feel free to jump in, but.
Yeah. Come on forward so we can capture it on the microphone and YouTube.
So once you get the middle seat, so you go by the mic.
Thank you. Yeah, we're working very collaboratively, especially where the educational videos, the crux, and trying to instill more strategy. So we're vertically integrated. For instance, with the crux, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have a strategy that's introduce, then invite or inspire, and then educate. So with that strategy right there, we're trying to hit promotion as well as recreational responsibility. And we're working collaboratively to try and get a strategy of podcasts that back that up. We're not just doing it, we're being very selective. Both teams are working together, find the best possible option. We're racing the clock a little bit to try and do some of this in 2023, but I think we have a very collaborative piece going, and I'll say it's collaborative because we're pretty busy in our shop. I know that Sky is giving a lot of cycles on trucks, working with these guys. We're also very excited about the gold award they just got, trying to maximize that into both the promotional, the recreational. So I think very quickly we're coming together to be collaborative and maybe change the conversation, and it's not just either or, that it's tourism promotion or responsible recreation, that they can be both, or they can be stratified or at least linked, so we have a vertically integrated strategy. And then we can go on the backside and start understanding, how much traction we're getting, what our metrics are. With Crux, we're already talking to them about using the IP, the geo, finding out where people are watching, where are we getting these hits? Where are we getting these views? You know, where are we pushing to a European strategy where right now today we have someone in a observatory talking about astrotourism. So, you know, we're trying to get strategic and collaborate that way. So is that a good way to?
Yeah, I think I just want to make it clear, like when we're talking about the program, like talking about the specific line item of responsible recreation programming. You know, there's some projects that were in that this year that are going into economic development and some that have come into us. And the reason behind that decision is just like purely logistical and they're like, who on staff is managing the project, and you want that person to be able to see the budget and the Excel software. So for example, the Wander app, I actually don't know what budget that originally came out of, but that was an economic development project that our staff ended up managing because it was required so much information about the trails, right? It was like really nitty-gritty information about the trails that we had the expertise for. You know, the Crux Academy project was in our budget, and we kind of started it because we had to reach out to all these different land managers that we, you know, communicate with every day. So it's really easy for our staff to manage. And now that's shifting over to Sky and taking on project management. So just like big picture so that everyone understands that, you know, basically all of our staff are involved in projects, and then some are in our budget and some are in their budget, but there's a lot of, you know, exchange and crossover.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's I think helpful to point that out. I wanted to go back a little bit to something you were saying earlier about some of the proposed new positions are for people. I think you used the word stratification, but sort of, you know, managers. And yeah, I think, you know, especially in this budget year, you know, we always, you know, look skeptically at any request for new positions. But I do think that I think it was 2018 that Grand County started to want to, you know, prioritize some of this, you know, communicating with visitors who are actually here to get them to recreate responsibly, et cetera. And it was frustrating how slow that was to take off. Like, you know, money would be budgeted, but it wouldn't be spent. And the reason it wasn't spent is we didn't have the staff capacity to spend, you know, so the money was there, but the people to manage and make sure it happened weren't. And I think we're still, I think our capacity to put money toward these efforts is still less than our desire to fund it. So I think it's, you know, it's good to point that out. I'm not promising for the positions to make the cut, but I do, if we think this is important, then we can't just throw money at it. You know, it has to be also, you know, positions and people to manage the volunteer, et cetera, or communicate with the businesses.
Yeah, I would say that, you know, whenever we're talking about providing information to the visitors and the public, especially folks in their trip planning phase, we want that information to be accurate. So that just takes a lot of time, right? And it requires a lot of communication with stakeholders because everyone needs to get eyes on it. So it's definitely, you know, requires project management.
Maybe I misunderstood, Ben, but you spoke about the two of you were collaborating in the responsible rec and the promotional advertising. How are we stretching responsible recreation to be actual promotion?
With the Crux, there's an actual strategy to have 3 videos. The first is to introduce Grand County, to introduce the sites there. The second is to inspire. So gets back into that inspire strategy, the Discover Moab, that type of piece. And then the third piece goes into the recreational. It's a three video series, correct?
It's more than 3 videos, but it's
it's a funnel strategy. So what we're trying to work on now, thanks for pointing that out, is the funnel strategies. Get the word out, inspire, and then get people here, and then start directing to a responsible rec. And that funnel also, you know, is trying to inspire others that may not have to be here for responsible rec. They may be here for film or to go see an arch. But we need to understand that where is this promotion going? What are we advertising to? Are we getting the right people targeted? And we have a metric coming back that shows somehow who we're reaching.
But the beginning of your funnel, so to speak, is promotional, which is going outside of Grand County.
Absolutely. I mean, it's going as far as Europe, it's going out of country. And it's going to different demographics, so. Within our own country, so we're being very. I think we're trying to be very. Educate ourselves on maybe doing it differently than we've always done.
Yeah, I think, I don't know how much time we want to spend talking about strategy in this meeting, but I think the idea is basically, yeah, there isn't a hard line between responsible recreation and promotion, because basically you're, putting things out in the world that showcase one's beautiful landscape and all the things that people come here to visit. And then you're, directing them into trip planning, and trip planning is that area where there can be a lot of responsible recreation information, right? So you see an ad for Moab, it takes you to discover Moab webpage. There's videos oriented towards planning ahead and preparing your trip. You click on those, and it's giving you information about, what it's like to river raft in Moab, and then also all of those, that information you want people to have about, protecting themselves, research and rescue prevention, protecting the environment, and then educate user conflict. So it's.
Yeah. I might add to it, it's maybe shifting more to an owned media and a paid media. And I don't know this yet, but it may enable quicker pivot strategies. Already on their side, they've pivoted who the audience was, went from a business model to a prospective tourism model. So it does allow us to pivot a little bit more, which may be more efficient spending. So.
I think it's also worth pointing out that the statutes that govern what we, sometimes shorthand, we call it the promotion budget, but it's really, the establish and promote budget. And then if you look at the definitions within the statute, it uses other very general words like develop. And so I think, trying to get, this is, mostly about public lands and recreation, but trying to make that sustainable so that things don't get trampled or people aren't leaving toilet paper, things like that. I think that very easily falls under the establish or develop things. So it's not true that, this is all about promotion. Promotion is one of a few things we can spend the money on. And
Jacques.
Yeah, Stephen.
On this, that's true. The first portion that Commissioner Walker mentioned is true. However, the back half of the statute states that it has to, quote, attract transient guests to the county, including planning, product development, and advertisement. So I just want to make sure that I know Commissioner Ludwig just stated that there's not promotion. We have to make sure that it is combined with attracting the transient guests here. And I think that's the goal and the intent. But we just want to be very, very certain that we continue to do that and continue to have the strings that attach whatever expenditure we have out there for, let's say, active trails. We need to have a direct tie back that shows that, yeah, this is attracting transient guests to the county, because I think there's going to be an increase of scrutiny to TRT, and there has been. So we just want to make sure everything that we have is buttoned up as much as possible. So just an eye for that as well.
Thanks, Stephen.
And I welcome input on, which bucket these items fall into.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that for sure, and I think that for me, it goes a lot with like the beer advertisements on TV. The first half of the ad is all like drink beer, and then every ad ends with drink responsibly and drink in moderation or whatever. And I think that like figuring out that like ending sentence of drink responsibly, visit responsibly goes hand in hand with all the promotion and development and kind of protecting that resource. And
yeah, the section of the code that Stephen just read, does include the word, develop. And I think that's, linked to, but distinct from promotion. If you promote something, you can't just promote it and then walk away. You have to make sure it can sustainably, take visitors for year after year. And I think these things, I think we need to I think we've neglected that part in the past, and we should be trying to spend more money on that. So.
yeah, and I'll just reiterate, I definitely welcome input or feedback about how to classify those different items. It differs from 2023. I'm just going off of what the decision was for last year. I also want to say that, you know, I think this process is a little bit different this year, just that in the ad meetings in the past, we've maybe gone through line items and I've gotten a bit more sense of like what, you know, what's a priority for the commission and what's not a priority. And so, you know, I guess my expectation is that at some point there will be, you know, feedback from the commission about which of these line items have support and which don't, and then there'll be a process on my end to adjust accordingly. And for my priorities for the department, staffing, transportation, and vehicles. Right now, we are using old vehicles that are in the shop, and even when they are all functional, we don't actually have enough to cover our operations. So we're relying on personal vehicles from staff. I just want the commission to be aware of that, you know, we work on trails and trailheads, so we need to access those locations. And then storage and space, there's a request in here to purchase a new shed for actually the trails team. We have overcrowded shed, which is a little bit of a safety hazard, to be honest. And then the shed we're currently using could go to the responsible rec program. So kind of two birds, one stone. Right now, a lot of the responsible rec stuff is in the bus barn, which I think the sheriff has plans for, so it's a temporary solution. And then also the multi-phase projects we've been working on. So for example, the Crux Academy is the video production company we've been working with. And this is a project where, you know, we've invested a lot of time and resources for this first phase of the project. And the second phase of the project gets more into the promotion and getting it out to the public. And so I think on our end, we wouldn't want to cut that project because it would essentially, you know, would do justice to all the resources that have gone into it so far. So just so you know, those are my priorities, and then you know, the other program line items take lower priority to that.
Are your vehicles eligible for the lease program?
So we do. So actually, the commission approved on the, I think it was August 15th meeting, leases for new vehicles, but you know, we don't expect to get those until the first quarter. And just based on, you know, we've been waiting for a new truck for 2.5 years, so just based on the delays in the past, I want to put something in the budget to pay for adequate repairs for the current vehicles, and then also keep some amount in there for reimbursing staff, because the reality is that they're using their vehicles when ours are in the shop. So hopefully it will get resolved, but just trying to plan ahead a little bit, right?
One topic that I know had drawn some conversation and discussion was the $60,000, which is the county's portion of a contribution towards the non-motorized trail master plan, I believe is how it's called.
That's right. Yeah.
And I know, you know, I guess I just wanted to raise the topic in case there was more conversation that would be had about that. The other thing, Maddie, I think it would be good, because our training line here, as displayed in the detail, that's, you know, up quite significantly. And I think it would probably be appropriate for you to speak to the importance of that increased training for your staff.
Absolutely. Okay, we'll start with the master plan. So the non-motorized trails master plan, it will be a joint effort between the city and the county. So I have preliminary quotes from 2 different consultants, and they went as high as 300,000 and as low as 50 to 75,000. With a lot of debates internally among staff meetings. So based on speaking with Elise at Planning and Zoning, 120,000 is middle range of what we can expect for a consultant for that update. And so, you know, my goals with the budget are basically to plan for that amount, and then if it ends up being less, we can do a budget amendment and reduce that amount. But half of that in this budget, half of that's county, and then half of that's from the city for our ILA. So I have 60,000 from the county in here, knowing that that might reduce once we get more refined scope of work from consultants.
Which line is that, Gabe?
There's 60 included in this professional and technical, that's the county's portion, and then the 60 from the cities, it's capsulated in this mod city ILA expenses.
But that's not an expense for the county, so is,
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, we it passes through us, so we have it in revenue from the city.
okay, so somewhere in the budget, there's a -60 that
Correct.
cancels that one out. Okay. Do you have like a list of, like what the deliverables are from this plan or the scope or anything like that?
I have a breakdown from one of the consultants. Like a crude breakdown, and so it includes project management, baseline data, GIS prep, public involvement, planning and plan development, trail and traffic
Yeah.
engineering for alignment and safety.
I guess I meant more from our point of view, like it's gonna tell us, public lands trails that we want to build or, extensions of paved trails in Spanish, but
Yeah.
yeah,
I think our weak spot is the active transportation side of things. So more city, county, neighborhoods and adjacent public land adjacent areas. And potentially getting into open space because we don't currently have a plan for that in the county, and one communities do have that. So I think less the like far flung dirt trails.
Okay.
I think our department has a pretty good we have great connections to the community for that input. We have mechanisms for getting that, and we have really good understanding of feasibility for those projects.
Mhm.
And then the stuff that gets a little bit more urban.
okay, so more focus on the closer to town things, because over the years, I've seen us spend, lots of money on consultants for planning, mostly, P and Z planning, not this project. And I've become kind of skeptical. I'm not sure we usually always get our money out of these things. And I can point to a lot of specific examples. So on the one hand, that just makes me reluctant to, like for $100,000 a year, we could hire someone for a year to work only on this. And would that get us more than hiring the consultants? And so I think that's an interesting question to ask. But I think it's also true that we can't just do it all in-house. And I think Maddie's definitely made that point in the past that we can't, so it's not an option to say, oh, Maddie, you can just do this yourself. She's fully booked, on other things. So it's kind of a tough call. And but I do think that even if we were to approve the budget line item, I guess I'd want to look very carefully at what before deciding to actually spend the money. I want to make sure that we're going to have something worthwhile at the end of it, because I think a lot of our past planning exercises have not resulted in that kind of thing.
So was there an RFP put out for this?
No, this is like very informal conversations to get a crude estimate to budget. And then I don't expect to actually start this project until fall of next year. It would be late next year. Because basically January and February are when we have time in the office to do planning for this coming year. And right now we're in the middle of operations. So I haven't fully developed like a scope of work. I think it's going to take a little bit of time to get that together.
Yeah, I'd be curious as to the scope of what we're exactly looking for here. I don't know if there's anything out there. As you said, the one consultant gave you some rough information there. If that could be provided to the commission, I think that'd be a good start, maybe.
No, you should go ahead.
I was gonna say any more questions.
Okay. Well, I was going to say I've got to leave in just a few minutes. What else is left on the agenda?
Ben was going to speak to the film, more specifically to the film commission budget and changes that are
Okay.
requested for next year.
Okay. Well, I think maybe I will have to miss that, unfortunately.
Do you guys want a brief overview of the training request?
Yes. Can I also, in the quickest form, the breakdown of the salaries request?
Okay, let's start with training. And then I think Renee's actually watching too, so she might come over for the salaries, if there's stuff I can't answer.
Okay, thanks.
So training, so we have a risk management action plan now. And so a lot of these trainings are involved with that. So this includes risk management training for our program administrators, because we are still a fairly new department. So really trying to catch up on our policies and procedures, trainings, making sure everything's in alignment for risk management. This includes OHV driving training, because we will potentially have a full-time motorized trail ambassador next year, which is grant funded. We also are in the process of purchasing 2 UTVs through a grant. And so we'll have this new equipment. We want to provide training to the staff. And so the total chunk for risk management is $19,000. The one part of this that I think I'm planning to talk to Stephen more, and set up a meeting before this one, but for the trail ambassadors, we have $900 for first aid training in there. All of the other trainings in here are more about like staff. So for example, getting wilderness first aid for the trail crew. If someone on the trail crew gets injured, that certification would be for treating that staff person. Whereas the first aid would be more general, in case trail ambassadors encounter the public on the trail who are having medical emergency, to give them, you know, a basic understanding of what symptoms for certain things might look like and CPR training. So I think there is a question about, do we want the trail ambassadors to have basic first aid training, or do we want them to not have any first aid training and just be the people who call for help with the spot devices that we have? So that's a conversation for Stephen. It is $900 out of that total amount. We have $10,000 for reimbursement for higher education, about $7,000 for skill development. So this would be tread lightly master training, $150. Marketing strategy for me, because that's become a large portion of my job. So understanding that realm, speaking that language. And then we do science certification for the trail ambassadors to give them that natural history knowledge that they're communicating to the public. There's $4,200 for technical training skills. Sorry, I'm trying to go fast too. If you want me to.
No,
Okay.
you're good, Maddie.
Okay. The technical training skills, I put the Utah Outdoor Recreation Summit in this category and the Mountain West Trails Conference in this category. And then we also set aside some funds for a rigging for trail work training, which is something we're going to have to find. There's very few formal trainings for trail construction. It's a new and quickly growing industry, but there aren't necessarily like the same certifications you have in other industries. So we're trying to get those trainings basically through these trails conferences, these regional trails conferences, and then potentially trying to hire someone to come in and teach us more about rigging. That's something we don't do in other trail crews.
What sort of rigging?
Rigging would be like using the grip hoist to elevate rocks and bring them to the site. So you're not right now, we are pulling them with the grip hoist, but if there's a cliff band, which we have a lot of
Sure.
here,
Yeah.
we don't.
Right.
We don't.
So highly technical stuff.
Yeah. About 4,100 for leadership and management training. This was a request from staff. A lot of our staff are fairly new in in their management career, including myself. So Udemy and Coursera are two they're online platforms, I guess, that provide a variety of trainings, including things like dealing with conflict at work and some of those general things that staff don't necessarily have training on. And then a leadership course for our operations coordinator, and a course for myself as the director. We have 1,100 for administrative skills. So this includes things like some are free, like everyone's taking Excel trainings right now, which are free, but grant writing courses would be helpful, because I think there's a lot of opportunity for grants out there. And right now I'm the only one's writing them. And so there's some limits on what I can write and manage. And using Adobe software, which we use a lot for making signs, for a lot of different things. That includes like InDesign, Illustrator, Adobe Acrobat, Photoshop, those programs. $875 for outreach. That would be conference that we're presenting at. And 800 for further skill knowledge and development. So this would be like someone from the Moab Museum speaking to the trail ambassadors for further development on their knowledge of history of the area. Those types of things really help with staff retention too. We're able to offer those trainings. And $60 and $240 to get two staff master level environmental educator certifications. I think that covers all of it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's super informative.
Yeah, and I think an important point is that, you know, for the risk management, this is something that, you know, I think we need to do, and I think there are options. If it's too much this year, we could split it up. We could have some staff get their certifications this year and some the next year and stagger it. For like the wilderness first aid, for example, that lasts for 2 years before we have to do a refresher. So there might be some benefits to that.
Hi, Renee.
Hi.
Just
Right.
years.
Terminate.
I think that's all training unless anyone has, further questions about those categories. I think there's a spreadsheet in there, right? For trainings.
I have it.
Yeah. Okay.
I just wanted to touch on the salary and benefits request. So everything as far as new requests or position reclassifications are captured in the presentation that you've all seen, but also in that ranking survey for the active trails are all on there.
Have a safe trip, Kevin.
And labeled, but Maddie, I believe, has it mostly built out, or we can provide some additional information of how those requests are increased over 2023 to 2024. Provide a deeper level of detail on that.
Yeah, so I think what you all want is for me to maybe go through the summary document.
This one?
Yep, yes, perfect. And so, and if this doesn't cover everything, just let me know. So the positions that are 100% funded by the county are the director positions, operations coordinator, and responsible recreation coordinator. The Healthy Trails Coordinator, this is 50% county and 50% Southeast Utah Health Department. The proposed full-time motorized trail ambassador position, so it's 30% county and 70% grant funded. This is kind of the total salaries and benefits. So how that actually breaks out is that the grant's covering 100% of the salary, but they don't cover benefits. So our match is the benefits. And then it's also important to know that this is tied to like a larger grant. So, you know, our match is the benefits for this position and a few other items. And then we're getting, you know, the salary for the full-time, salary for the part-time, to UTVs, to enclosed trailers, a whole bunch of other stuff. So it's, you know, a small portion of a bigger grant. And then moving to the part-time. So the volunteer business coordinator position that Renee's already presented on. So this would be primarily county funded. We could explore talking to the city more about the ILA, because in the past, like one volunteer event we've run was the Moab facelift, and we actually hired someone to run that event because we're not really set up for that. And we use city funds to hire that person. So that is a possibility to have maybe a contribution from the city for this position to help run events that have projects that are also on city property. So the Moab facelift event, it had, you know, some projects on the trails, some on in city parks, and then some out on areas. So it's kind of a community event. The trail ambassadors are roughly 85% county and 15% grant funded. Sort of our core staff, the spring, fall, seasonal trail technicians, are 30% county and 70% grant funded, and our summer season and summer staff are 100% grant.
Maddie, can you just, I know you touched on it before, but when we say county funded in any of these lines, can you just go over
Which
establishing
ones?
tourism and promotion, yeah,
Yeah.
which county what funding sources go to those county funded?
Yes, and I will have, Renee, if you have anything to jump in with, because again, this is something where usually how it works, is I make my request. And then there's, a little bit upper level to allocate optional sales tax, the TRT and those different things, so. Hopefully I can encapsulate it, but yeah, feel free to jump in. So for the trails program side, so optional sales tax, I believe is sort of filling those gaps, things that are grant funded. And for responsible recreation coordinator, that's 25% film rec convention, 75% establishing advertising and promotion. Healthy trails coordinator, I believe that's just film rec convention. And then for the part-time trail ambassadors, I believe that's also film rec convention.
And then the director and operations coordinator, is that mostly
Optional
optional
sales
sales tax? Okay. Thank you. Well, any questions, at this point, any sort of requests for information, so on and so forth?
No, I appreciate the deep dive. That's definitely informative. Thanks.
One thing I'd like the commission to be aware of is that I will be traveling to a wedding on November 28th, which I think is the next workshop and meeting. So
Right.
I could probably schedule to join remotely, but I think if there's any questions or anything I can do beforehand to prep for that, since I won't be here in person, I would love to do that.
Great. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Thank you very much.
All right, so that was review of Fund 47. Now we're moving on to review of Fund 16. So back to this document that I had pulled up previously. What I wanted to key on, or what I asked Ben to key on, because it seems like the other pieces of this budget's, it's hard to imagine that there's necessarily concerns regarding the requests as far as like any changes or increases. But however, I think I thought it would be worthy for Ben to just give a little bit of an explanation of his vision and ideas regarding these lines in blue, which are designated. I went ahead and just highlighted them because it's not so clear in our regular budget that those pertain to the film commission, but they do. And so yeah, take it away, Ben. Thank you.
So, thanks. I've talked to everyone, I think, one-on-one about what reason I'm pushing to have the film commission shored up a bit. It's mainly the economics of it. Like I said, right after I got here, we got the state audit, just one production 70 days, 45.7 million in spend in Emory, San Juan, and Grand County. I know the majority's here. Just simple back of the napkin, that's 780K in tax revenue. Since then, I've visited or been invited. I wasn't able to go, but we have just places here in Moab that are rented, storing equipment. They've been passive, so there's passive income. Just this week, the strike is over, the SAG strike is over, so these guys are going to get back to work. These productions, when they come, they all come with per diem. They rent cars, they rent hotel rooms with one person in each room. So it seems like economics I would like to go after. So I think we have a good person to do it. So trying to shore up the department where we're very aggressive in a aggressive game right now. So we started this budgeting process, which is my 24th day on the job. Today's 58th, so I'm much wiser. Was basically, where do we go? Where can we go and find these guys, get them here? I know just since September, the way this works, our film commissioner Vigo was able to redirect a little bit of automobile advertising over here. Brought 20 people over for 7 days, I believe. Hotels, that. So we have an opportunity there, and that's why I'm pushing to shore this up. The statistic I keep getting when I go to these state presentations is that 37% of Utah tourism is driven by film. So I think there's two opportunities. We're going into the 100th year of film anniversary in Utah. We have 75th anniversary for our own film commission. I'm not sure where the strategy is yet, because a lot of the history, I mean, some of the movies that people are excited about that were filmed here were filmed 30 years ago. There's a couple generations that don't even know what we're talking about. So there may be an opportunity to maybe through some festivals or something reintroduce that this year or get some excitement. But the main thing that I've really pushed and trying to direct our department to do is to go find new productions and get them here and give that to our team. So that is the strategy behind that. I also think that the commission itself has been bounced around a little bit. It doesn't really have a home, and as long as it's at home in my department, I want to make it the best and shore it up. And if it stays there, great. If not, it has a really polished, good product that we wrap a nice ribbon around, and it goes to the next place. But while it's here, I'd like to see it be one of the best ones there is. So that's why I'm putting the weight behind it. I believe in the person, and I believe in our department that we can go be creative and get aggressive and compete for this stuff.
And I would say that you all can refer to the budget advisory board presentation. Each of these lines here in the requests, they are broken out in little spreadsheet worksheets that pop up in this budget software. That I didn't prepare at this time. It's just, I gave you, there's a link to the YouTube video of that presentation where it really drills down into that. I don't know if there are any questions or any highlights you want to touch.
One thing I'll say is, this is not an industry that comes cheaply. These meetings are in nice places, and they're expensive, and they're packed. And so some of the travel and conferences that you'll see, we're willing to cut some of those out. I think first cut, we cut 40,000 out of the budget when we presented the first time. There's 35,000 more in there that I found that I want to just push out that let's cut it today, but if we had to cut it out, I'd rather cut part of the operations out and support the salary benefits for our commissioner. And we can either run lean or creative, but I do think that, I've used the analogy is let's just fish in a really good boat with really good bait and go find some productions and go pull up as many as we can. There's a history of people that have paid for their ranches around here through commercials and that. I think without good metrics to show today, I think that's the better model is if we can get commercials over here. But we certainly have the canvas. These productions come with teams that reclaim and do the responsible recreation. Oftentimes we don't even know they're here. They hire caterers when they bring animals. Our vets get busier. That's what happens in small towns where these films get nested. So that's my argument.
One other thing you had mentioned, the 75 years of film in Grant County and campaigns associated with that. And there is a line, not in Rec Film Convention, but in the tourism promotion side, where there's an amount allocated towards a marketing effort associated with that 75 years.
Yeah, and that's also one that we talked about. If we need to trim that and be more strategic, but
I haven't suggested that.
Yeah, no, but it's one thing that it's one if we're going to go after that, it's got to have a good strategy. It's got to be integrated and tied to creating some excitement, maybe honoring the people that made movies here, but also create excitement to make people want to come here.
Where is that line gauge? Is that encapsulated?
That's
paid
paid
media?
media. That's in that.
And do you remember the amount?
75,000. And that is an amount that we've already reduced year over year, so. Not that specific line item, but the complete line item.
And then I know we already went over this in the BAB meetings, but remind me what the familiarization line is in the professional services right above it. It's up back up.
Professional service, we can click into that. I believe that is professional services is when.
Is that back up? Oh, yeah.
That's right there.
When we're using Star Hall and that it takes equipment and stuff to be able to show films in there, and so there's support there. On the familiarization, I will have to go back and look on what that. I believe that's film familiarization tours, but I would be wrong to speak of that specifically.
Yeah, I remember that being taking folks out.
Yeah,
Come that visit to check out locations and things like that.
I want to say it's scouting, but I'm not.
Oh, right, that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And also that is supported by, as I've told everyone individually, there's a very good tool set in the Commissioner's office that it's speed of heat, works quickly, tracks, and so I think that combined we have a good performance there.
Is there any discussions around, I know that the city contributed heavily to this in the past, and is there any and it's Moab to Monument Valley, so we're representing a big swath of southeastern Utah. Is there discussions with any contributions from other entities?
The discussions are in infancy right now, but there's discussion of a possible grant with through the state. It will be combined with San Juan County that I'm following up on that possibly for a vehicle. There's also a history where San Juan had contributed an amount and have not come for that ask yet. But as we get closer in the other things we're doing, I definitely present that. Also want to show value. I know our commissioners headed to Monument Valley today. Buildings are down there is having their 100 year, so coordinated effort. And made everyone in our department very aware that 2024 starts in less than 2 months. So we're talking about marketing and budgets that I'd like to see that strategy now, not wait till it's approved or not before we start thinking about it. So there needs to be a plan.
I think the correlation between the film commissioner or the travel, Lisa, I don't even know correctly what her title is, and others in your department is a great way of showing us what's coming back into this county because of their salaries as well as their travel expenses and other things. Because that is driving a big part of the TRT and the sales tax that we receive here. It's not all promotional advertising, but it certainly is advertising our county, and this is to me a pretty important part of making sure that continues and being able to show your department tied to, as you were saying, the numbers earlier on, I think is extremely important, the income that comes into not just businesses, but the state, the county, and the city as well. So everybody benefits from that increased tourism here based off of that.
I'd like to see some, to elaborate a little farther off of what Bill said. I'd like to see that return on investment in hard numbers. If we had to, a lot of studies and are not taken into consideration, but I would like to see those, how the tie-ins, how many people stayed in rooms, how many people stayed in, I mean, in this film commission. I want to celebrate those wins as much as possible, but I want to see those numbers as much as possible going into the next year. But
okay. Get them.
I would field any other questions or comments. I have a couple little housekeeping things to just bring up to close the workshop. But while Ben's still sitting up here, anything else? Thank you so much.
Sorry, the different funds that contribute to this portion of the department, it was the TRCC and the TRT. Is there
Just TRT, the 1/5 of 30.
Rec Film and Convention.
okay?
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah.
So with that, that concludes our agenda as presented. One thing I did want to communicate with you all is that I was planning on checking in to see the progress that you all had made in terms of ranking and ordering new positions, requests and classifications. And then in last week's leadership meeting, I went ahead and approached the department heads and followed up with all of them. I've sort of, my goal for these next couple of days is to work with them in presenting to me any items in their department requests that could be considered above baseline operations and maintenance in a ranked fashion. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm looking at the deficit that we have to make up. And I'm wanting to give department heads the opportunity to have agency and what cuts might be made.
Great.
And so I'm looking forward to sort of getting your rankings and sort of having a picture of, what new positions and reclassifications you're serious about granting and which you aren't. And then combining that with sort of a cut package that comes from department heads. That'll sort of, that proposal will give us a better idea of how much more we're going to need to make up. Does that sound good?
It does sound good. Yeah, thanks for doing that, Gabe. I think that's an important step. So you're lighting a fire on us to get those surveys done.
Yeah.
Got mine done last night.
For sure. Yep.
All right.
And the timing of election week, and election day and Thanksgiving next week. I'm recognizing that I'm gonna have to really keep my head down on this week in particular. So you can expect updates and information to come through this week. Not that I'm not going to be working on next week, but election day gets Monday and Tuesday is really intense with elections, and then it's a holiday. And so I'm sure, that's what I'm looking forward here.
Yeah. Understood. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right. Is that it, Gabe?
That's all I have.
Anybody else before we adjourn? Cool. Thanks everyone for getting together early on a Monday morning. Rough time slot, but well worth it. I definitely furthered my understanding. So thank you. And with that, it is times at 11:05. I'll adjourn this special workshop. Thanks, everybody.